everybody. I'm Delegate Ken Plum. Welcome to our show, Virginia Report. You probably notice around town a lot's going on in terms of transportation. And when we say transportation anymore, we mean people walking, we need people biking, buses, now the Silver Line, and of course our cars. We're going to talk a little bit about the system in Reston and its future with Tom Bashadny, the Director of Transportation for Fairfax County. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
In most communities, we would say that transportation is a purview of state government. But in a community of more than 1 million people and the complex system we have an active involvement of local government as well. Talk a little bit about your relationship and what you do with state government as well.
Sure. State government is responsible for the roadway system primarily. And they do the maintenance of the roads, they fix the potholes, and in many cases in the past they also were involved in expanding the roads. They're still involved in that, but the local governments are now taking a much more active role in expanding the roadway network and also making sure that the roadway network accommodates the variety of users that you mentioned, both bikes and pedestrians and also transit users. Transit systems in Virginia are traditionally a local effort, and so the Fairfax County operates the Fairfax Connector, and that provides bus service here in the Reston area. And as a regional system, Metro Bus also provides service in parts of Fairfax County and in parts of Reston as well.
Recently, of course, Tom, Reston as a community was greatly affected by the advent of the Silver Line.
That's right.
And while we welcome Metro access, and heavens knows I spent 20 years working on trying to make that happen, it had an impact on our community and certainly an impact on you and how you do your work.
Absolutely. And as part of the opening of the Silver Line, we actually replanned about 47% of the Fairfax Connector system. So almost half the Fairfax Connector system was changed as a result of the Silver Line. So instead of having service run all the way to West Falls Church the way it previously did, we took those same hours of bus service and we upgraded the service into the Wheelie-Reston East Station. We also were able to provide more weekend and late night service and more frequent service for the people here in Reston.
Yeah. And I commend you on how that system has worked because, again, with the capacity of the Silver Line being what it is, in order for it to be most effective, we would want people to not have to drive their car to it, but be able to walk to it in the best case situation. And of course, you very wisely planned in the Reston Station garage a place to put your bike if you wanted to bike there.
Sure.
And then an active series of buses dropping folks off.
Right, and the idea is that we want to provide people with transportation choices, and we don't want people to feel that the only way that they can get there is by car. So from most parts of Reston, you can get a bus directly to the Wheelie-Reston East Station frequently throughout the day and on the evenings and weekends. And we really encourage people to take advantage of that. In many cases, the bus stop might be right out in front of their house. And so we do have resources online. You can call us. We can give you the details of how to get on that bus and when the bus shows up. But for most places in Reston, bus service is very close by to get you to the metro station.
And Reston, of course, has a proud tradition of having had an internal bus system for many years, and
yes,
even before anybody dreamed about the metro, had a bus of its own running downtown.
That's right.
So it has a proud tradition. But building on that then, what has happened, of course, is the advent of an improved transportation has increased the value of the commercial district, and we see more and more buildings going up and hence more people.
Right. As part of recognizing that the Silver Line was coming and the Wheelie Station is now open, and we have 2 more stations coming in Reston at the Reston Town Center and then also at the Herndon Station, the Board of Supervisors and Supervisor Kathy Hudgens initiated an effort to redo the comprehensive plan. And in 2014, the board adopted a new comprehensive plan for the Reston area that includes much more mixed-use development right around the core of Reston along the toll road. and particularly around the metro stations. So that mix of uses, instead of just being office development, which largely the area between Sunset Hills and Sunrise Valley is now, will now include residential as well, so that people can live and work in the same general area.
Transit-oriented development, we call it, and no better example than what the county did in a partnership with a developer at Reston Station. That seems to me to be really, truly unique.
Well, it certainly is unique in how we've done things in Fairfax County, but there are other examples in the region and certainly nationally where people have done similar type of projects. But yes, in that particular circumstance, we have the parking garage, the bus drop-off area, the bike room, as you mentioned, kind of below grade, and then above it, Comstock has built a residential building that's now open. They are under construction with an office building, and they also have plans for a future hotel as well.
That put some pressure on Wheelie Avenue for sure. Wheelie Avenue has been busy for a long time, and it put additional pressure on Wheelie Avenue. But in adopting a new comprehensive plan, there are also plans as to how that might be additionally relieved. Could you talk a little bit about what could happen?
So as part of the new comprehensive plan, they also included a new transportation plan for the Reston area. And that has a number of large projects, predominantly additional crossings of the toll road, but then it also has what's called a grid of streets, which makes connections that allow people to travel around Reston without necessarily having to get on Wheelie or on Reston Parkway, some of the larger roads. So the 4 new connections, one at South Lakes, one at Soapstone, one at Town Center Parkway, and then one out at Rock Hill Road, which is in the western part of the county. The first of those will be the Soapstone connector, and we're in the middle of the environmental work on that study right now. We had a public meeting just recently in June to kind of update the community on how we're doing with that project. And by the fall of next year, we'll be through the environmental process to allow us to move forward on actually designing and constructing the project.
Now tell us a little bit what that means. What is the Soapstone project?
Okay, the Soapstone project is a new connection that will go across the toll road. It will start at the intersection of Soapstone and Sunrise Valley Drive and go to the north side to Sunset Hills Road. And what it will be is a multimodal facility. It will have room for 2 lanes for cars, center turn lane, and then bike lanes and pedestrian improvements as well. And it will provide access for buses to get from the south part of Reston to the Wheelie Reston East Station without actually having to be on Wheelie Avenue. So that relieves some of the congestion that you see now on Wheelie Avenue.
So what that means that when you go down Soapstone Drive now, or when you go up Soapstone Drive, as the case may be, where you dead in at Sunrise Valley, you'll just continue right across the toll road on the new bridge.
That's right.
That will facilitate the multi ways in which people might be traveling in that direction.
That's right.
Planners and you have used the term grid of streets, and I think sometimes we in the public don't think much about that, but the lack of a grid of streets, we feel the impact in traffic, but how does a grid of streets play into all this?
What the grid of streets does is it actually spreads traffic out. In Reston right now, you have your major arteries like Wheelie, Reston Parkway, Sunrise Valley, and Sunset Hills. And if you're traveling around Reston, most likely you're going to have to be on one of those main arteries, or you're going to have to cross one of those arteries. And anytime you do that, you're going to have a congestion point.
Right.
By building a grid of streets, you're adding to the network so that you're building smaller blocks, and you're building connections that are maybe parallel to Sunrise Valley or Sunset Hills or to Wheelie and Reston Parkway. And allowing people to move around. If I just have a quick local trip, I can do that on the grid without getting on Sunset Hills or Sunrise Valley. And in addition to that, it opens up development areas so that the more mixed-use development can occur in those areas that are now opened up because there's access through this grid of streets. Rather than being a parking lot or something like that, it becomes a formal street.
Sure. Wheelie seems busy, Reston Parkway seems busy, but you have no choice. With a grid of streets, you would have potential of more side streets to parallel that. or to reduce having to cross those. When do you expect, or what's the anticipated date of opening the Soapstone extension, the bridge on Soapstone?
We don't have a specific date now, but essentially it's about a 10-year development process. And you think, wow, that's a long period of time.
Yeah.
But when you think that we're working in a built environment
Right.
where there are office buildings
Right in
on
the way.
both sides of the toll road, and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with those,
Right.
either to snake around them or to look at potential through redevelopment process, maybe the building moves or something like that, or is replaced. So it is a complicated process. It's different than if we were just going to build a bridge out in the middle of farmland and you have a lot of room and flexibility. Here we actually have a built environment, and we want those businesses to continue to be successful while we're building the road project. So that's part of what we're trying to do now is to figure out the details of how that facility can be implemented. And it will take some time. There's also a lot of utilities in that general area, and it will take time to move those and then ultimately get to the construction piece.
You have a little bit better situation out at the 28 and the Rock
Hill Road?
Hill Road, because you don't have as much of a built environment.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's being taken into account too with the Silver Line extension to
Right.
accommodate the piers for that bridge.
Yes, we were able to look at where the Silver Line was going to go and where we needed to potentially put piers so that we don't have to go in and essentially start construction right along the new Silver Line at some point in the future.
Right. Now, what I'd like to go back to Reston Station for just
Sure.
a moment and say another word about what I think about it, the unique features. Certainly, transit-oriented development is not unique, but that Reston Station was a parking lot owned by the county
Right.
for, I believe, 800 cars.
Right.
That space now will have parking when completed for about 4,000 cars. I believe it's the number.
Right.
I think it's pretty astounding.
Right, and we, back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we were looking for a park and ride lot in the Reston area.
Right.
And we were looking for one with the specific intent that at some point it might be converted to a rail station.
Right.
And so we were able to acquire that site there at Wheelie and the toll road. And the intent always was to convert it at some point to a rail station.
Right.
So the county had the property, which was nice, and then we worked with the developer, and 2 parking garages were actually built underneath. The one is the public garage for the metro parking, and then the other is the private garage for all the development.
Right.
And then that allowed the development to occur on top of that.
Yeah.
So you got a lot out of a very reasonably small piece of property.
Really, for sure. Biking interests are strong in our community, and I think generally are getting to be stronger. Again, we're talking about being able to add bike lanes to an established road system. That
Right.
presents a challenge, but one we're working on piece by piece.
Exactly. And one of the things that we're doing is, as the Virginia Department of Transportation, or VDOT, does repaving, and they do have some money now to do repaving, so they're moving around the county with that. But we're also looking at our bike master plan. And if we have bike facilities on a road that they're repaving, we're looking to see whether or not we can incorporate those bike lanes into the repaving project. And we've been able to do that in several parts of the county. It's actually very inexpensive to do that because if we're just talking about paint, they have to repave it anyway. And in some cases it means a little bit narrower lanes, but they're still very adequate for the vehicle traffic and provides for the bike traffic. And one of the examples we did that on was Soapstone.
Right.
And same curb to curb distance, we haven't widened the road at all. We've just used that space a little differently so that the bike lanes can provide that facility for people who want to bike while the vehicles can still move up and down on the facility.
For pedestrians, it's always been a little question as to who was going to put in the sidewalk, whether it's going to be VDOT, the county, the developer, or whomever.
We, prior to the opening of the Silver Line, Supervisor Hudgens established a group called the Reston Metro Access Group. And there was a group of citizens and stakeholders that really looked at the area around each of the 3 Reston stations with county staff and identified things like missing links, turn lanes, bike facilities, things like that that need to be implemented as part of getting ready for the Silver Line. So we were able to find funding for those, and as a result we've been able to fill in a lot of those missing links. We still have more to do. We're also working on the Reston Town Center and the Herndon Station to try and get as much of those done before the rail system opens, phase 2 opens as well. So it's really a partnership between the county, VDOT, federal government for providing some of the funding, but we're moving through to try and implement all those recommendations.
Coming forward, of course, we are now seeing the beginning of the work on the Reston Station for the Silver Line and how it will connect to Town Center and the challenge of doing that because we then have Sunset Hills Road running through about where that occurs. Mm-hmm. What do you see happening there?
What will likely happen there is Boston Properties has a significant piece of property there between Sunset Hills Road and Reston Town Center. And they are looking at redeveloping that property and doing it in such a way that it provides kind of a gateway into Reston Town Center. I don't have the details yet, but I know that they're working on ultimately a rezoning for their property that will allow them to increase the mixed-use density there and also provide that gateway into Reston Town Center.
Our neighbors to the east, Tyson's Corner, was greatly impacted by the Silver Line, but Tyson's Corner had been a challenge for many years because you had about 100,000 people working there and about 15,000 people living there, and obviously a lot of people moving in and out.
Right.
How do you see the progress on what's happening at Tyson's Corner?
There's a lot of positive things going on in Tyson's Corner right now, and one of the things that we're seeing is a lot more residential being built in Tyson's Corner to try and get at that balance that you said, or imbalance, I guess, that for so long the people that worked in Tyson's had to come from outside of Tyson's to get there, and that generated a lot of traffic. By building more housing within the Tyson's Corner area, people can now live there and work there, and so maybe they take a short metro trip for a couple of stops to get their office. Maybe they can walk, and in some cases maybe they can bike to their work or take a circulator, one of the Fairfax Connector circulator buses that are there.
A lot of excitement because, again, when you talk about how do you solve this problem, the grid of street issue comes in Tyson's Corner as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tyson's was developed with very big blocks and lots of parking. So the grid of streets is actually trying to break those blocks up so they're more walkable. There may be, you know, people may want to just go out for lunch, but because of the imposing nature of the pedestrian environment, they get in their car and they drive.
Sure.
And so what we're trying to do is break those big blocks up into smaller blocks so that people feel much more comfortable walking short distances to go out for lunch, to go pick up the dry cleaning, to run an errand, something like that. The fact that there's so many parking lots in Tyson's actually provides us an opportunity to do some of those things where there's not a building in the way and you can work around that.
Tom, about the process of how we make decisions in transportation improvement, let's talk a little bit about that. I have been impressed with what I've seen you and the Transportation Office in Fairfax do, as well as what VDOT does too, in terms of trying to involve the public. Can you talk a little bit about how it is that a project goes from an idea or concept into a practice?
Sure. You know, in Fairfax, what we've done recently is we engaged the public for about 2 years in developing what's called the Transportation Priority Plan that was ultimately adopted by the board in January of 2014. And that includes projects that the board has said that we would be working on for the next 6 years. So we're about 2.5 years into that right now. And not only did we have a public process to develop the plan, but now for each of the individual projects, there is a public process that goes on with that. So it may start out with a public meeting, community meeting, to allow the community to become more familiar with it, to give us their thoughts about a particular project up front before we get into any of the design work for it. And then also, as we do get into the design work, then we have more formal public hearings, maybe on the environmental document or on the preferred alternative for the project, and some of the details of that. So, and we try and involve the public on all levels. We might go to something as small as a small community meeting, a homeowners association or something like that. We generally have our larger, public meetings or public hearings, but then we're also trying to use technology as well. And so for each project now, we establish a website that has all the basic information. On the website, there's a comment form right there on the front page of the project website that says, hey, if you have any comments, please email them to us. In addition to that, we often do online chats or something like that on larger projects, but we also try and use the social media arrangement to get word out about, hey, we're having a public meeting, or there's an opportunity for you to comment.
Yeah, the point I want the public to understand is that this is a very open, transparent process.
Right.
That when you see shovel in ground, that means that there's been a couple years worth of
Yeah.
discussion prior to that.
Right.
And that it is, you can go anywhere from the ads in the newspaper, which you use, to social media, to community organizational efforts, to get to know what is happening and actually have a voice to say in it.
Right.
And influence to the outcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to build projects that are supportive of the community.
Correct.
And the community that the people who live in that community want to have.
Right.
And so the project that we might build in Reston might be different than a project we build somewhere else in the county, because Reston is a little bit different. It's unique.
Right.
And so we want to work with the people in the community to make sure that whatever project we're doing fits into the Reston environment and has those features that the people in Reston want to see in the project.
Now, Tom, we've mentioned, I guess, the next up for big-time projects that are brand new for Reston would probably be the Soapstone Crossing, correct?
That's the next biggest project.
And then, short of that, the repaving, which is an issue in Reston, is really a VDOT issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assure viewers that I work all the time I can to get our projects moved up as much as we can. There's a formula for how they do that, and sometimes the formula works and sometimes it doesn't. But the repaving, can you think of other projects that we ought to mention that affects Reston?
Well, we have a lot of smaller projects that are coming. One of the ones that that I would mention is the Wheelie Avenue overpass on the W&OD trail.
Okay, good.
That project is not a giant project in terms of overall view of Reston, but for those users of the W&OD trail, it's a really important project.
And Wheelie Avenue.
And for those
Yeah.
users of Wheelie Avenue.
Absolutely, yeah. And I commend you for going forward on that.
So we're in the middle of the design right now. We've got about 40% of the design done. There's a couple of significant coordination issues there. As you know, there's overhead Dominion Virginia power lines.
Right.
And so we're trying to coordinate with Dominion to make sure that when we build this overpass, that we don't interfere with, obviously, with their lines or with the power supply. So we may end up having to move some of those existing poles. That's a pretty complicated process, but in order to make this work, that may be what we need to do. In addition to that, on the bridge features itself, we had a community meeting about a month ago that we asked people for their input on what is it going to look like. You know, how do you want the view of the bridge?
Right.
Do you want it to be looking more concrete, more steel, more? There's a number of ways that we can do it,
Right.
and so we got some really good feedback from the community on what their preferences were on the looks of the bridge.
Good. Look forward to that project. Tom Bashadny, Director of Transportation for Fairfax County, I want to thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
And thank you for this update and for the good work that you do on behalf of our community.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's an open process, this planning transportation. Watch out in my newsletter or in the regular newspapers and so on for the public hearings that occur where you can have a say in terms of how these projects will go forward. Thank you for being with us on Virginia Report. Join us next time. Good night.